Lost Private. We're in Normandy.
Welcome, everyone, to the We're Not Lost Private podcast. This is episode 28. I'm your host, Joe Muccia, and having just gotten back in December from touring the Battle of the Bulge battlefields with the tour group of mine, I had been exchanging notes with this gentleman, our next guest, for quite some time about coming on the pod because he is the subject matter expert for this particular battle, and I've it's been a long time coming. We tried to work the schedule out, but before we kick into that, we're on Patreon, patreon.com/We're Not Lost Private podcast. But my next guest is a gentleman by the name of Bob Konings, and he is probably the most qualified guy to come on and talk about this particular battle because it's a very personal topic for him because he lives in the area. But Bob, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this. Like we talked about before we went live, it's been a long time coming, but I'm really, it's such an interesting story, and it really talks to so many different aspects to the Battle of the Bulge and all the things that could go wrong and right and all do in this battle space right here. I think, for me personally, when I look at it, as a success in a defense in depth and the use of ad hoc units put together for specific purposes, not always purposely or perfectly built for the jobs they're asked to do, but it really does speak to the overall message of how well the U.S. Army recovered during the battle and then was able to really stunt the advance of the German army. In particular here, this is really, to me, becomes the death knell for this particular advance for the Germans here. But again, you're the subject matter expert here, and I'm along for the ride, and we'll add in whenever I can. But we can't really talk about Manhay and Grandmenil without talking about Baraque de Fraiture. And
Yes.
And with that said, would you like me to kick off the slides so we can show?
Yeah, I've sent you several of them. Of course, we can show the audience one of the slides.
There we go. But please,
yes,
by all means, the show is yours, Bob. Let's go. Let's run this out.
Yeah. First, thanks for the invite again. And yes, Baraque de Fraiture is the starting point for us in the Battle of the Bulge in this area, starting around let's say between the 19th and the 23rd of December. So the Battle of the Bulge already is on its way for a couple of days. And what I also have to say is that Baraque de Fraiture is without any doubt connected with Saint-Vith, because all the troops that came into this area came from that sector. Saint-Vith was highly important for the Germans because of the railroad lines running into Saint-Vith coming from Germany. And the troops over there, like the 106th Infantry Division and the 7th Armored Division, tried to hold on as good as possible. And they held it out until the 23rd of December. That's the moment that the whole sector is collapsing and all the remaining troops are heading as fast as possible in this area. Well, Baraque de Fraiture already is under fire for a couple of days. The Germans are starting to push in a little on the 19th of December, but they have an enormous problem with gasoline. They don't have enough gasoline to go into this area. When you read their stories, their tanks were filled up with like a third of the capacity in the tanks, and apparently they stood around the area of Houffalize for quite some time, and until the 23rd, they are refilled and they are starting the attack on Baraque de Fraiture.
Now, that's going to be a recurring theme through this. It's going to cause a couple of pauses in the German advance throughout what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
And with Parker's Crossroads, I think folks that are familiar with this show and have been on and have tuned in, we've talked about Bastogne quite a bunch. And this is a microcosm I look at because it's a key crossroad intersection that the Germans absolutely have to have. Because again, as we've talked about in previous shows, this is not tank country.
No, absolutely not.
And so you need to have those road networks, especially when you're going cross country. Your gasoline usage, your petrol usage is much higher.
Yeah.
So to expedite the movement and to conserve their gasoline stocks, they have to have these road networks.
And if you look on the map of Baraque de Fraiture, you see those four arms going everywhere. The other one on the right goes to Houffalize. Then the other side to the right goes to the town of Renier, and that's the direction of Vielsalm, Saint-Vith. But there's another division going over there. That's the Hohenstaufen division, the 9th SS, and they need that road to connect all the stuff together. And then further to the left to Samray, we have in the area of La Roche-en-Ardenne and Hoton, we have the 116th Windhorn Division pulling up. So with this crossroads, you can connect all the troops that are heading this way.
But the defense of the crossroads falls on basically, like you said, some fractured units that have come out of the Samvi pocket, including the unit of who ends up being the erstwhile commander of the small task force there.
Yep. Yeah, and that's also really interesting about the whole story of Baraque de Fraiture, that approximately when they arrived there on the 19th, pulling back from the Saint-Vith Saillant, it's the guys from the 589th Field Artillery Battalion with only 3 cannons left, and approximately 30-40 guys in trucks heading towards Baraque de Fraiture. And when their commanding officer, Major Arthur Parker, arrives there, he sees that crossroads and directly understands this is a highly important place to stay on. So he asked the people over there to get out of the trucks and set up a defensive line. While on the way, he will go to Manhay, which is only a few miles away. It's like 8 kilometers from there, asking for reinforcements, because he realizes if he can hold that crossroads, the Germans will have a lot of problems over there. But in Manhay, they are retreating everywhere to the rear, so they don't have time for him, and they say, well, we cannot help you for now, but you stay on Baraque de Fraiture, do your best there. So
but by that time, the 18th Airborne Corps has been alerted, and the 101st and the 82nd Airborne have been deployed into the area, so he ends up benefiting from that.
Exactly. What is really interesting, when you look again to the right arm to Renier, it leads directly to the village of Fraiture, Baraque de Fraiture. It's named after the village. And in that village, when Parker's going there, he finds James Gavin, the general from the 82nd Airborne. So they run into each other, and Gavin, he's with the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, and he says, well, you can have one company from us, and that's F Company. So Parker's already glad that he has some reinforcements that he can take with him to the crossroads.
Yeah, and that's typical of Gavin's leadership style up front. And to his credit, being up front, he's able to understand that the key. This is key terrain that they need to hold.
Yeah.
But the Fox Company of the 325th is not the only reinforcement that Parker gets.
No, he has several units coming in, or also from 7th Armored Division. He has several quad guns coming in. That's half tracks with 4-barreled machine guns mounted on top of it, and some infantry that's coming in. So at the end of the build-up for his defensive positions, he has around 350 guys that are put into action. So 3 cannons, a couple of tanks, some quad guns, and that's it. And at that time, he has no clue who's coming towards him. So they try to figure that out. And when you're standing on that position, it's the coldest place in this area. It's also the 2nd highest place in the whole Ardennes, in the whole Belgium. We have the around Eupen, that's the highest place. But this is cold, it's open, and you have some wood patches in the direction of Houffalize. So they tried to figure out during the days who will be coming. And the Germans at that time, they fire away some artillery fire just to find out how many Americans there are in the area. Sometimes the Americans respond with open fire at the same time, so it looks like a big bunch of a big army that's firing towards Germans. So that makes that the Germans are hesitating, still waiting for gasoline, etc. And it's on the 22nd that Parker is standing on that crossroads, and there was only a little bit of snow at that time, and he was drawing the new defensive lines for that day. And from the wood edge, the Germans see on the backside of his helmet that this is a higher placed guy, like a major. So they fire an artillery round in his direction, and he gets wounded really bad. So he's taken out of the war, and the command's then taken over by Major Elliot Goldstein, who's trying to find out who was in the area.
Well, interestingly, and I definitely want to cover this point because if I'm not mistaken, on the 20th, they actually capture several Germans who are leading a kind of a reconnaissance patrol from the
Yeah.
2nd SS, and they gain some valuable intelligence about what's coming towards them. And I think that it begins to dawn on Parker and the other leaders at there that they're in for a fairly big fight. Like you said, it influences them to use deception techniques by trying to amass fires to show that, at least forward facing, they are a larger unit than they really are.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting that they were able to, the correlation between the capturing of the Germans and the intelligence they gather, and then the use of deception to try and show that, hey, we're a bigger unit. It's not going to be as easy a fight as you think it is.
Yeah.
But
we
yet
see
they
we saw
worked
that a
through
couple
it.
of times. Yeah, we saw that a couple of times during the Battle of Bulge that the Americans just make you think that they are with quite some people in the area, but it's only like 300, 350. And what's also it must have been pretty shocking that they find out that it's the 2nd SSS Reich that is coming their way. It's not a complete division. They were in Russia, they had a lot of losses. In Normandy, they had a lot of losses. Almost got wiped on the Falaise pocket. So it's not the complete division that's approaching them, but it's still a lot of men and a lot of gear coming their way, together with the Volksgrenadiers. They have the 560 Volksgrenadiers also heading their way. So I can imagine that those guys, those 350 on Baraque de Fraiture, got pretty tense in it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, at the moment that Major Goldstein takes over command from Arthur Parker, he decides at one point that he will take a jeep with several prisoners of war and drive back to Manhay to give it another try to get more people in his direction. And he's knocking on all doors in Manhay, which is just a crossroads with some houses around it. And he finds somebody who says, okay, you can have a couple of tanks, and we have one company from the 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment. You can take that. And as an extra, we have Company C from the 75th Infantry Division, and that's what I learned recently, part of D Company also from the 75th Infantry Division, 291st Regiment, that will pull up with you. And they had just arrived, brand new. Just arrived from Le Havre, totally zero experience how to act in a full-scale war. So this is going to be tense for them.
Yeah, I remember reading on your website, you had some outstanding information about them, and they really had not had any time to get acclimated to not only the environment, but just to be in a combat situation where how they would deploy themselves. And they acted very much like they were on almost like a stateside training exercise during the opening portions of the battle, which doesn't work out for them. But as we'll talk about later on, they recover quite well, and they do very, very well in the closing stages of the battle, especially.
That's a learning process for them. So the first couple of times that they are in the fight, it's sheer horror for them.
Yeah, it's an unforgiving environment to have that baptism and learn those hard lessons. Yeah, because generally it's your leadership that's going to suffer first. And
Yes.
then it forces people who are not leaders to become leaders, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. While Major Goldstein is on his way back to Fraiture, when he's getting close to the edge of the top of the hill, he comes under fire of one of the Panther tanks. While he was in Manhay, the Germans started their attack on Baraque de Fraiture, and American troops quickly get overrun. And while he is getting in the direction, he comes under fire already from a Panther tank. And later he stated in his memoirs that it was the worst day in his military career, because when he was needed most, he wasn't there. So yeah, it's a poor story. It's a poor story.
Yeah, they're eventually overrun from multiple directions, and although portions of the force at the Crossroads do end up escaping, for the majority of it, they're either killed, captured, or wounded, which is quite a shame. But obviously, enough people remembered it that it's been memorialized at the Crossroads. So if you do get a chance to travel over there, I do recommend stopping by. You'll get a real good understanding of the terrain and how open it is, as Bob stated. It is
Exactly.
you don't have a lot of cover in the area, so it's
No.
very easy for the Germans to zero in on where you were if you were on that position. And when and if you do get a chance to travel over there, it's very easy to see that.
Yep.
But
and we still
this
have that cannon over there.
yeah, I know it's really a great centerpiece to that memorial. But this sets the stage, right? Because now they have an open network, an open road network, the Germans to operate from as they continue to move towards Manhay and Grandmenil.
Yeah, that's their first idea. What you also have to realize that on the left side, the road to Sam Ray, there's another part of the Second SS's Reich, and they are going in the direction of Audegne and Dauchard, with the idea to go in the direction of Freineux, and they hope to avoid the Manhay sector. So what they did over there is, maybe you can slide to slide number 2, because I think that's the map we need for that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see a little bit from here. That's a map that I made myself. They are coming from the right. There's a small road with you see a lot of white blocks on the right side of the map. That's the platoon of the company of Hargesheimer, and they are waiting close to a bridge. At first, they thought the bridge was mined. So they drove around the bridge to go into the ditch over there, and they left the attack on the village of Freineux and La Mormenil to only 4 tanks, manned by Fritz Langanke. And their goal is to take Freineux and then move on to La Mormenil. And they made a complete mistake in that attack. They left the platoon, the company of Hargesheimer on the side of the road, and there's another part of the regiment just sitting on the road. So that whole attack fails, cost them an enormous amount of time during those days, and they failed to take Freineux, and they failed to take La Mormenil. And we see several units from the American side. We see the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who did a tremendous job over there holding the lines, and we see several units from the 3rd Armored Division, the 32nd Armored Regiment, also doing a tremendous job in Freineux itself and in La Mormenil, only with some light tanks and some Shermans, and they managed to hold off the Germans, which
And you have
gave
Task
them
Force,
so much delay. Yeah,
you have Task Force Kane and Brewster, and then the C Company under La Sauche. From the 517th that come in, and they have a bit of a yo-yo experience, right? They come down, then they come back up, and then they're redeployed back down. They attack forward, they come back. Yeah, there's a lot of yo-yoing going on where you're taking and losing ground and recovering ground. But yeah, all these...
what's especially enormous. You have to come one day with me, Joe. We're going to have a lot of fun. Is that you still can follow the original trails that those guys took in the direction of Dauchard, and there's an old railroad line that's still in use for touristic purposes. And because of COVID, a couple of years ago, that train didn't drive. So I could follow the original tracks from the 570. And it's amazing how they went in the direction of Dauchamp, following the old railroad tracks, and came under fire from all kinds of units from the Infantry Division who were giving support of fire. And they managed to reach that town without a lot of wounded guys, and they wiped out a lot of Germans over there. So when you look into this fight, and I want to take it only just a short time to tell you something about it. It's amazing that they hold it here. And if you go back to Baraque de Fraiture, when you count the days, they started on the 19th of December, and on the 23rd they finally managed to get the crossroads of Baraque de Fraiture, but then they still have Olen Brewster right in front of them, between Belhay and Baraque de Fraiture, blocking their go through. So that's the reason why the Germans decided in the area of Freineux to collect all the tanks, go back to Audegne, and take a small detour to go in the direction of Manhay.
And during this time, again, they're still suffering from gasoline shortages, which causes them to have to pause their attacks. I mean, that has got to be tremendously frustrating for the commander when you know your troops are ready to go, you have your tanks staged, and then you know you don't have enough fuel to get as far as you would like to, and you have to stop and wait for your trains to catch up, your supply trains to catch up with you, and the fuel's coming all the way from Germany, and it's bogged down in the supply lines because they pick these such narrow corridors to advance through. There's no way for them to rapidly move their supplies forward, and that's why they have to rely on captured American stores throughout the battle and all over the battlefield, not just in one particular area.
And that's also interesting what you mentioned now, eh? It's not only the gasoline in our region that's running out, but around the 23rd of December, up in the north, Joachim Peiper's Leibstandard and the Kampfgruppe Peiper, they're already finished. They're already done.
Yeah.
So the northern sector is already wiped out.
Yeah, and Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army becomes the point of main effort at this point.
Yeah.
Which, frankly, if the Germans would have looked at the terrain and analyzed it better, although you couldn't because Hitler had his ideas about how he wanted to run it, and he wasn't going to have any deviations from his plan. But really, Manteuffel should have been the point of main effort the whole time. And if he was, they probably could have crossed the Meuse at some point and made the turn. I'm not saying they would have made it all the way to Antwerp. Probably not. They would have been, especially when the weather started to clear up and Allied air power is brought back into the battle. But I mean, at that point, he's really, his army is the point of main effort. And it's interesting to see. And his comments too, he talked about the different aspects of the fight and where he lost momentum, particularly in this area.
Yeah.
So we are
map for a second. Yeah, if we can go to slide number 5.
Okay.
I think that's the
Or do you need 6?
No, I think
Number
this
6?
is the number 6 is the whole position of the Belhay situation, if I'm correct. Yes. Yeah, this is also good. So when Freineux and La Mormenil, when the Germans realized that they couldn't take it, they diversed the whole group of tanks in the direction of Belhay. And it gives us a funny moment because, like I said, Major Goldstein was headed to Manhay, and he picked up Olen Brewster's task force with the 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment, a company of it, and Company C and part of D from the 75th. And the only thing they could do was retreat back to a farm that's between Baraque de Fraiture and Belhay, and that farm is still there. And he deployed his tanks and the troops around that farm. And according to the 75th, they were a little bit complaining about Olin Brewster, that he was too lazy. He just hang around in his tank, and apparently he gave Company C the order to retake Baraque de Fraiture. Well, we already know that it's the second SS Reich over there with the 560 Grenadiers, so only one company sending in that direction is practically suicide. And that's what happened with this group. If you can go to slide number 5, you can see how the attack when they were spread out over the terrain
Now,
on both sides.
For those of you listening and not viewing this on YouTube, I will have Bob's maps available on our Patreon page, so you could go back and listen and take a look at these. They're fantastic. This is some fantastic work, Bob. I really appreciate you putting these together and allowing us to use them for this.
Yeah, well, it's great to make, because it makes the situation more lively to see how those guys went through the terrain.
And easier to understand as well, and when you see it depicted the way it is.
Yeah, and in the map you can see that we have 4 platoons of the 75th. I have to correct myself. I said it's 291st Regiment, but of course it's the 290th. And they are following the road in the direction of Baraque de Fraiture, not realizing that they're running straight into infantry from the 2nd SS Reich. And it became a slaughter over there. And until today, we're still missing one guy from C Company. And I think he got hit by an artillery shell or so. So they didn't find him back after the war. What the only thing those guys could do is retreat back to the farm and stay as close as possible to the tanks of Olin Brewster, and with the 509 a little bit in the back, and they tried to hold out as long as possible. Well, on the 24th of December, if you go to that next slide, I always imagine that there's a mirror in the Sherman tank looking back to the rear, and all of a sudden, Olin Brewster, he sees on that crossing of Belhay a lot of tanks approaching, German Panther tanks going on to the road in the direction of Manhay. So he directly grabs his radio and contacts Manhay with the message that he's surrounded by Germans. Right in front of him on Baraque de Fraiture, he has elements of the 2nd SS Reich, and right behind him, there's an enormous amount of Panther tanks going in the direction of Manhay. So he asks if he can go back to Manhay and retreat to the rear. But in Manhay, they are pretty firm to him, and they say, no, you stay in a defensive position and we work something out with the Panther tanks. Well, what they did is assemble 23 Panther tanks driving behind each other. And I'm not sure if they realize that on that crossing where they are going to, they will find a lot of elements of the 7th Armored Division. We have 3 companies from the 40th Tank Battalion. One is pretty close to the crossing. There's one company all the way in the back. There's now a big farm over there with their guns aiming in the direction of Baraque de Fraiture, and close to Mal-en-Pré. We have the company of Emerson Wolf. That's Company B. Emerson Wolf is, for me, it's a holy guy. I had his brothers a couple of years here visiting us, and they gave me a special gift. They gave me the report of Franz Fraiture. Franz Fraiture is from the 2nd SS Reich, and he was driving as the lead guy. He drove Panther 435, and he was leading this big column, and he left a statement that's pretty accurate and very detailed until the moment that they are leaving Grandmenil, but we'll talk about that later. So as they approach the crossroads, they come under fire from the tanks from the 7th Armored Division. And during the firefight, they managed to kick out one of the tracks from Franz Fraiture, his tank, which disables him. And he makes sure that the tanks from Company Company A, come under direct fire of bazookas. So he sends in several bazooka guys from with Panzerfaust, and they knock out all the tanks in that direction. So after the fight, Franz Fraiture can change his tank. So he orders the crew behind him to get out, abandon the tank, get out of the tank, and he will take over their tank.
What's
A little-
interesting is and these tanks were from C Company of the 40th Armored.
Yeah.
Yeah, were they? I thought they had some armored infantry with them from the 48th. Were there?
Yes, they were sitting in the wood.
But they weren't
Mhm.
able to protect them from the Panzerfausts, the Panzer Hunters.
No, they are already retreating.
Interesting.
Yes.
And if they
yeah.
had been in position, they may have saved some of those tanks.
Yeah, what's really interesting is that when you look at the map, there's a red dotted line giving the position approximately where they are, and the foxholes are still there. If you sit in that, and in those positions, you have a clear view all over the terrain. So with their bazookas or machine gun fire, they could have taken care of a lot of things. But somehow, I think the fire was so intense coming in, also with artillery, etc., that they decided to abandon their places and retreat to Manhay. Right before those attacks, Emerson Wolf was discussing the same. He sent out a jeep driver in the direction of a village called, with a really funny name, Houtsiplou, to find out if Malampre was coming under fire, if he could retreat in the direction of Bra and Manhay, which was a pretty good option. So when he came under fire from the troops from the Second SS Reich, he retreated with the whole column back in the direction of Malampre and then to Bra, where he also found the 82nd Airborne, and then retreated back to Manhay.
Now, had the 4th Panzer Grenadiers made their way up to Malampre yet, or they?
They were coming through the woods on the right side, and they were heading in that direction. During the attack with where Franz Frauche lost his tanks, we have a really funny incident, because a little bit more in the back we will find Panther 401, manned by Commander Ernst Barkman, pretty famous from the Normandy campaign, and apparently he is thinking that Franz Frauche and the leading tanks are already on their way to Manhay, so he decides to get out of the column, bypassing the tank of Franz Frauche. It's already dark, not realizing that he is now the leading tank going on the way to Manhay. And when he's reaching, it's not on the map, but it's the first wood part. When he's reaching the first wood part in that area, he sees a tank sitting on the right side of the road, and he thinks that's the tank from Franz Frauche. So he orders his driver to park right next to it. And when he's opening the hatch and he wants to have a conversation with Franz, he's looking straight into the compartment of the driver, and he sees red lights. And he's realizing that he's standing next to an American tank. So I can imagine, a little bit of panic, he decides to gives the order to the driver, can you move back a little bit so we can take it out? And while swinging the turret to the right side to take out this tank, he's banging against the hull of the cupola. And well, long story short, they finally managed to take out the tank, and he rushes off in the direction of Manhay, where we will find him back later.
And this will become a mad dash, essentially, because the Americans I don't think they realized at that point how close the Germans were to Manhay, and I know they had a vehicle park almost. I would call it a park, where they had a number of vehicles sitting, and then they had a number of them arrayed near the main crossroads in town. And they have no idea that this German column is heading their way. And I don't think the Germans knew what kind of numbers the Americans had in Manhay. And it becomes a very chaotic action, as I'm sure you're going to talk about. I put the picture of Ernst Barkman up.
Yep.
So are you good with this map, or you want to continue moving? Did you have something else?
If we have this map just for a little second,
Yeah.
Can you move up a little bit so I can see the slides? Because that's all. I can send you a couple of pictures of Manhay. Yeah, what's also interesting at the moment that Franz Frauche is settled again in his reserve tank. They move on also, like Ernst Barkman, in the direction of Manhay, and he sees at first company see that's hiding in the hills right in front of this big farm now. They are exposed, and a few of them are dug in. And he stated later in his statement that while driving on that long road, it's a stretch road, he sees those tanks in the field, and he literally has to stop his tank because of the trees on the right side of the road to take them under fire. And according to him, the Americans apparently got shocked by the incoming fire, and they are abandoning their tanks, taking with them the infantry guys. So they are fleeing the scene in the direction of Manhay. Later, the American part said, no, we didn't flee. We had a good fight with the Reich Division, but it's Emerson Wolf that also complained a little bit later that he did not have supportive fire coming from that hill, which suggests that they were abandoning their vehicles. Well, if you go to the next picture, we can see several tanks sitting in the January snow. They got knocked out. And in the distance, you can see a little village. That's the village of Mal-en-Pré, which got overrun also by German troops. Well, on one slide below, that's more in the summer. We still can see dug-in tanks. For me, this is a pretty amazing picture this is after the war. You still can see that they are sitting. I also have some pictures.
That was for years, right? There were a number of tanks that were still sitting on the battlefield years later.
Yeah. Well, we have another researcher in this area, and I really want to mention him. That's Eddie Montfort. And he's about my age. I'm 54. I think he's like 53. And this guy spent the whole life researching the area, and he's Wallonian, so he speaks French. But all the contacts that he had, thanks to him, we have pictures like these that he got from civilians after the war, etc. So it gives us a clear image what was left on the battlefield after the war. And this picture, because the lack of snow, you can see that they are pretty good dug in against incoming fire.
Yeah, for those of you that are listening, it's clear in the image that there are berms dug around these tanks, so they were definitely dug in. So they were in defensive positions. They were in what we call, I would say, hull down. In the American Army, we call it hull down, or the American forces, with just basically the turret up above the berm for observation and be able to fire at the enemy. So it was obviously these were prepared positions. It wasn't like this was hasty where they were just sitting in a field with no protection. They had gotten there in time to provide to dig in the defense. It's a very telling picture, and we'll thank Eddie for his fine work and for sharing his research with you.
Yeah. We always do that. If we got new materials, we'll share it.
Yeah. Again, we'll have Bob's website in the show description. So I highly recommend anybody who's interested in the battle, go check it out. He's got so much information, so many pictures. It's really a great resource for this battle. But where do you want to go next?
Well, if you take the picture below, we first have Ernst Bachmann another time. As soon as he's heading to Manhay, if you leave this picture, this is also really interesting. That one, because all the way in the back, you can see the road coming from Baraque de Fraiture into the town. And during his drive, he starts to realize that he's alone with his crew.
This is Ernst.
Yes.
Okay.
And at that time, he has bypassed quite some people with who fled the scene from infantry, but he also is attached to a couple of Sherman tanks that are retreating. So he tells his crew to keep silent and don't shoot, don't fire the guns, because we're getting in a little bit of trouble. And
it's a mixed column, but it's not the kind of mix you want.
and behind them. Nobody realizes that there's a German Panther tank behind them. So when he comes
following
around
the tail lights.
Yes, exactly. While coming around the corner, he has a direct view over Manhay, and he realizes, oh my God, the whole town is filled with tanks and jeeps and trucks, and there's a lot of infantry running around. There's a big motor pool behind the old station, and he decides to just keep on moving, hoping that he can get through. And when he's around the crossroads, what I've read is that in the old hotel restaurant, that's still a restaurant nowadays, there was an officers meeting and it's just finished. And one of the officers is getting out of the door for a smoke. And he's the first one realizing there's a Panther tank right at the crossroads. So he shouts to everybody that the Germans are coming, because if there's one German Panther tank, most of the time there are several coming in. So everybody having a panic attack and starting up their tanks, and there are getting ready to fire at the Panther tank of Ernst Barkman, who directly realizes, because of all the noise around him, that he blew his cover. So he ordered his driver to get out of town as fast as possible. And while they are doing that, he turns his cupola to 6 o'clock so he can fire at everybody who's coming behind him. Well, apparently his driver made a steering mistake for a small second, hitting a half track, and the tracks get entangled for a short moment. Well, he orders the driver to pull back a little bit so they get entangled again, and he managed to get loose, and then they move off and take off in the direction of the village of Chêne-au-Pierre, and then he's being followed by a couple of Sherman tanks. Later, he stated he knocked out several of them and knocked out several half tracks. If it's true, we never know. But when he's getting out of the village, he sees a log road for going into the forest. He takes that road, directly turns off the engine, directly turns off the lights. So they are standing in the dark, and in the distance they hear several Shermans bypassing, and that's how we got away alive. And when he gets out of the tank, apparently it's already pretty damaged. So he decides to leave it in the woods, and when the fighting in the Manhay sector is over, he goes on foot back to Manhay. And I must admit that from here, we don't have a vision what he did. Did he stay in Manhay, or did he participate in the next coming battles? I didn't figure that out.
Yeah. Interesting that you would think with the Americans taking back a lot of the terrain around there, he would probably get captured, but he ends up not getting captured.
Nope.
Interesting.
Yep. And it's pretty hard to get documents from the Second SS Reich, and everybody knows if you have some information about this unit, you know why, because they were very, very notorious in Russia, but also in France. So we didn't find any official documents.
Yeah, that's that's one thing with researching World War II German units. A lot of the paperwork was destroyed, and so it's only piecemeal the available documents that you can get, and some units don't have any documentation. But it's hard to stitch it together. Sometimes you have to, like piecing together any battle, you have to use the paperwork, and you have to use maps, and you have to use participant accounts. But when you take one of those three things out of the equation, it makes it very difficult to put everything back together again. But I think you've done a wonderful job so far, but in doing so. But there's, like any story, there's always going to be gaps that you're probably not going to fill.
Well, there's one gap that I would like to tell you shortly.
Go ahead.
There is a story I have from an American woman. Her neighbor used to be with the Second SS Reich, and there were a lot of Germans going to America as prisoner of war. He stayed there, and he stated that he was part of the Baraque de Fraiture and later the attack on Manhay. And according to him, Franz Fraiture was behind him, and Ernst Barkman was the first tank, and he was in between them. And all the stories that I have, and that's the statement of Franz Fraiture, that Franz Fraiture was directly behind Ernst Barkman with approximately a delay of 15 minutes. So when Ernst Barkman was hiding in the woods, he arrives in Manhay, already saw there's a lot of chaos and a lot of fighting going on. And when you look at the picture that you have now screened with the Sherman tank right in front of us on the right side of the picture, that's the tank of Captain Allen from the 3rd Armored Division. And they heard the noises of tank tracks coming in. And as soon he sees that first tank coming behind the building, he fires the gun, and he takes off again the tracks of Franz Frauscher's tanks. So within like an hour, he's losing 2 tanks with lost tracks. Well, when you look at this picture, you see the tank of Franz Fraiture sitting on the left side of the picture. That time they turned over the tank, so it lays on his side, but it's actually the proof that Franz Fraiture, his tank, got knocked out by Captain Allen. And I've sent you another picture. The first one that you have is from Manhay. That's slide number 11. And you can see the tank from Franz Fraiture here. But if you go to slide number 12, we have a zoomed in picture where we can see it laying on the side, got knocked out. As you can see, it's the right side of the tracks that's off. So again, he has to change. He has to change the tracks. Well, fierce firefighting breaks out. And the Americans, although they have quite some gear, they decide to leave the town and move back in the direction of the hills. Where we later find elements of the 7th Armored Division and the 106th Infantry Division, and back to Chêne-Pierre to set up a strong defensive position. Well, there's a lot of discussion going on if the Das Reich Division was heading in the direction of Liège, because as soon as they had Manhay, if they would go straight ahead in the direction where Ernst Bachmann was going, the road to Liège was laying right in front of them. Of course, we had a lot of American troops assembling there, like the 82nd Airborne. The 3rd Armored Division was pulling in from the Grandmenil side, so they didn't have much space to go into the direction of Liège. So they decided to turn on the crossroads to the left side and head to Grandmenil.
Now,
well, what's also
at Grandmenil, now you're starting to see the bulk of the 75th Infantry Division come in as well. But you also have elements of the 628th Tank Destroyer Battalion that show up as well, and they'll figure in on the fighting in a small way. But I think it's really the engineers that do the most damage to the Germans during the attack on the Grandmenil.
Well, it comes all together in this area, because when I'm on tour with my clients, I always tell them when we're in Manhay that you are hoping that something goes wrong, which will delay the attacks of the second SS Reich. Because although that there are already like 8 days on the way, they still have a good chance to reach the area where they have to go. So they choose to go in the direction of Grandmenil, and then we have the villages of RSA and Hoton. So that's their main goal. And if you go back to slide 11 for just a second, it's a really interesting picture. So one of the most famous pictures of our little town of Manhay, and as you can see, it's just a small crossroads with some houses. And for me, what's really interesting is that we have a Jeep sitting in the middle of the road. And I know from several veterans from the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment who retook the town on the 27th of December. This picture is made from the first floor of, at that time, hotel restaurant. And the photographer asked the guys on the ground if they could get in some more war stuff because it was a little bit empty. So the guy said, well, there's a knocked out Jeep standing on the left side behind the building. We can pull it up on the crossroads. So if you like to have that. And he agreed with that. And since then we have a Jeep sitting in the middle of nowhere on that crossroads, but it wasn't there.
And for folks that end up touring in the area, this is one of the spots where you can do a very nice now and then shot, because several of those buildings are still where they are. You know, they've obviously been repaired since the war, but it's again, it's a great place to go and do those now and thens, because a lot of the area is despite some damage from the war, a lot of it hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's some of the building have been restored. If you look at the picture of Manhay itself, in the back, in the middle of the picture, in the back side, you see the old school, and that's now the community hall. And the most damage was done on the 27th of December when the 517 has to retake that town. And the town got shelled with like 6,000, 7,000 rounds of artillery. So it destroyed a lot of buildings in that town. Well, let's go back to Franz Fraiture and his friends. Can you go to slide number 14 for me?
Yeah, there we go.
That's a map that's showing us Manhay on the right side, so that's where the tanks are coming from.
Mhm.
And because already incoming artillery fire, they decided to line up all the Panther tanks with approximately 50 meters in between, so they could safely go to Grandmenil. And as soon Van Fraucher enters the town, it's completely silent. He asks his driver to stop the tank. He turns off the engine, turns off the lights, and opens his cupola, and he's listening in dead silence. It's already around midnight of the 25th of December, and he hears nothing. But what he overlooks is that on the right side of him, there are two tank destroyers from the 628, as you mentioned, sitting on the lower road. The road goes down a little bit. It's like a sunken road. And they have perfect view on what's coming in. And they see that Panther tank from Van Fraucher heading on the Crossroads. And they decide to wait a little. And then they see another Panther coming on the road from Fischer. That's the guy's name. And they decide to take out that tank, not the tank from Van Fraucher, but the second tank. So as soon as they fire the guns, Van Fraucher is directly alarmed. See in the shadow the tank destroyer. Behind him, Fischer's tank is on fire, and Fraucher decides to take out the first tank destroyer. He fires at it, takes it out, but then has a lot of panic because there's right behind him a burning Panther tank, and all the rest behind him cannot go around it. So in his radio, he's screaming that they have to find a way to cross the terrain and come in his direction. But what they don't realize is that they are close to one of the biggest minefields between Grandmenil and Manhay. And years ago, I spoke with a veteran who witnessed this mine laying. His name is Vernon Brantley from the 75th Infantry Division, still alive and in very good health, a very friendly guy. And well, we always have a ball together. But he told me that they laid over 800 mines in that field.
Wow.
And when I heard that, I asked Vernon, so why did they place 800? And he said, we didn't have any more. Otherwise, they would have laid like 6,000 mines if possible. So the Germans are not aware what's going on, and they decide to send in several Panther tanks into that field. And that's where they are realizing they are in a minefield. So at first, there's only 2 Panther tanks that got knocked out by the minefield. And in the chaos and the panic, that's where they are in. It's their commander, Austrian Paul, who's sitting in the red tank in the middle of the road. You can see him on the map, who's standing on the top of his toe, shouting to everybody that they have to get on the road again, out of the minefield. And that's the moment that there's artillery pouring in. Well, Austrian Paul is getting hit in the head by a piece of shrapnel. He's bleeding like well, you fill it in, and he has to be taken out of his Panther tank into an ambulance and back to Manhay. Well, in all this chaos, one of the other company, led by Alfred Hargesheimer, he decides to take a detour. There's a small log road going around the minefield, and he's thinking of, if I can go around the minefield, I can go to Van Fraucher and he will be safe then. And while he's driving in that terrain with 3 of his tanks, we figured out he must have been the first one. His tanks get bogged down because these fields are so marshy, and so they are losing 3 tanks in that area. So when you look at the next picture, that's a picture made by William van Divert from a reconnaissance plane. You get a really famous picture of an aerial view where we can see those Panther tanks that are left behind and knocked out in that minefield.
Before I put that picture up, I'll just describe it to the list for the listeners. That the minefield, the 800 minefield, is crescent shaped, and it kind of starts on the western side of the exits of the outskirts of Manhay, and it basically covers up towards the road leading into Grandmenil and into the fields north of the road.
Yeah.
So it doesn't leave the Germans a lot of maneuver room, and they don't realize it. So those first few tanks get through, but they lose 2 in the field, the main field there, right? And then you have that second group of Panthers coming around. But like you said, by now there's snow on the ground, and once you get in those fields with those tank tracks, and you start churning up the ground, and mud starts to build up, the snow combining with it starts to make mud, and that's what bogs down the tanks. But I'll bring the photo up now, and like you said, this is a very well-known photo.
Yeah.
Every time Battle of the Bulge shows up in some capacity in media these days, you'll end up seeing this photo, always described as like the Panther graveyard.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can see the Panthers arrayed in the fields around the road.
And it's interesting because when you look at that picture, there's on the right side in the distance next to I think that's number 4, you see a black building. That's the electricity powerhouse, and that's still there. Sometimes I say if you live in the Ardennes, you become a really lazy researcher because all the buildings are still there. That makes it, and even the small house right in front of us, without the roof, that's also still there.
Yeah, when I was driving with my tour group in December, I pointed out those 2 features, and then I showed the picture, and I was like, "It's easy to see it." Like you said, I wouldn't call it laziness. I think it's definitely a resource when
Yeah,
and
it's
it helps
fantastic.
put people in the right frame of mind when they can look at a picture from the war, and then they look at it and see it's still in a similar state. It
Yeah.
makes it very easier for folks to picture where they're at and associate it. But yeah, it's great to have those waypoints available on the battlefield for you.
Yeah. And when you look at the picture of William van Divert in the back on the left side, you also see. I didn't send that picture to you. There's also a Panther tank on the left side of the road, and as far as I know, it slid off the road during the attacks in Grandmenil itself. So that's from the 25th till the 27th. And recently, I got a new picture from a guy from America. His name is Mark, and apparently he got a picture when the snow was not there already, because the picture you see here, that's January, and you see the number of it. And numbers in the Battle of Grandmenil, for me personally, are very important because it will tell us to which company or regiment they belong.
Yeah.
So when you see that picture on the left side, we have several pictures of it, but only with snow on it. And this guy sent me a picture without the snow, and we could see the number 424. And that gives us a lot of information that they belong to the group of Franz Fraiture, who was driving 435.
Yeah, it'd be fourth company of Panzer Regiment 2.
Yes.
Yeah, so and for folks that don't understand, the number we're talking about, the number is the turret markings that tell you what company and what platoon, what section you're from. That's the German way of marking their tanks. So like as Bob said, with the number 4 is the first number in the 3-digit turret code, it tells you it's 4 company, which had led the attack with its platoons.
Yeah, because we
if I'm not mistaken, though, two company was involved in this in some capacity as well.
Yeah,
or they're back and further in the column.
The 2 company, that's from Hargesheimer. And the 4
okay.
is
Yep.
Yeah, and that's really interesting what you say now, because I've been living here for 16 years now, and for 16 years we had a discussion with people talking about our own Panther tank. There's still a Panther tank left in Grandmenil with number 407 painted on it. And when I started the research in this area, I had a Dutch friend coming over, and for years he told me, "Bob, that number is wrong. There was never a 407." And because we have a new museum in Manhay that's there for the 5th year now, they got a picture as a gift from our Panther tank, and you see 3 ladies standing right in front of it. and it's made directly after the placing of the tank on that position at the roundabout.
Mhm.
And luckily, the photographer is standing in such an angle that we can see the original number on the Panther tank, 214. And well, that brings us directly to Harkesheimer company. So it's his tank. One of his tanks that is sitting there. And since then, we know it's one of the tanks that came out of the marshy ground that sunk away in the marshy field.
Did you need that previous map back up again?
Yeah, if you can, so you can see where it's coming from. So
right over here, I'll orient the folks that are watching on YouTube.
Yeah,
over here is what we're talking about.
I think it's number 1 or 2 on that map. So
and then
on the right side.
If you haven't been to Grandmenil to see the Panther tank, it's located right over here near the roundabout. To me, it's one of the must-see stops.
It is.
To go over there and to see the ground and the memorial to the troops that fought in the area, including the 75th. So if you get a chance when you're in the area, I highly recommend going there. Again, like Bob and I have been discussing, a lot of original buildings and original waypoints are still there for you to check out and look at it and get a good understanding of the nature of the terrain and how the battle unfolded. But please, Bob, don't let me stop you.
Well, and also visit Grandmenil itself. It will take you like 20 minutes to go through the village, but most of the buildings are still the same. Like my house. My house is in the center next to the church, and the complete front part of the building was blown out. Also the roof. So we still have war damage in our building, like most of the houses. Well, what's interesting from here is that we can say that the 407 has a different number. It's originally 214, and the community of Manhay is planning to do a restoration. I know there's tons of people that are complaining, and I agree that the state of that tank is really bad. It's rusty. There's a lot of pieces missing. And for years they are discussing how to restore this tank. In my personal opinion, we don't have to have a complete restoration like the tank in Houffalize. There's a beautiful Panther tank over there, complete, everything's detailed and well, very accurate. But for us, the 407 214 is a monument with a lot of tracks missing, and I think.
Personally believe you're spot on with that. I've taken my tour groups to Houffalize to see the Panther. It's beautifully restored, but I think there is something I'll say precious about keeping it in its state that it was first placed there. But I do agree with you. It does need some cleaning up. It needs some rust protection on it, and it definitely needs to have its original unit numbers on the turret. Because I still think, despite all the damage to it and despite all the, the weathering to it, I think it's an absolutely gorgeous example of the tank, and it should be preserved in its state and not taken away from the state it's sat in for so many years, only just to preserve it.
Yeah, and also the place where it is sitting. There are plans to pick it up and place it in front of the museum, which I also agree that it's a real great place to have it there covered, just like in Houffalize, with some lights on it. And please give it a camera, because there's still people trying to get off some bolts, etc., and they're cutting off some rubber pieces of the tire, which is absolutely ridiculous. Stop doing that.
But not only that, it's a bit of a it's a bit dangerous there at times. Cutting across the road to go take pictures of it. We've had to dodge a few vehicles now and again heading over to look at it. So I would say you're definitely right in that regard. It'll also make it more secured and less likely to have somebody get run over by a car or a truck going over to look at it. But it is a beautiful relic of the battlefield that needs to be preserved. Absolutely. And I agree with you. It should have its original turret numbers restored onto it.
Yeah. So if we go on from by the way, on the I see that now on the map that you're showing, on the left side below, at that time the museum wasn't ready yet, and they are constructing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Every
that's a
time I
must
go,
see too.
every time I go, the museum's closed. I miss it.
Really?
Yep, I missed it the last time with my group, and we stopped by. Like I said, we wanted to see the memorial and check out the tank. And unfortunately, it was the museum was closed because it was right after you had the battle event.
Yeah, it sounds like Tuesday
Yeah,
that you came.
yeah, we literally got there like the day after everything had
Oh,
closed down. All the holes
yeah,
were
that's
still
bad.
dug in the ground.
Yeah,
Everything was still
yeah.
visible from when you guys did the reenactment. But yeah, that's another thing. If you're going to go and travel and you have the time to put it in your schedule, every year they do a reenactment of the battle on the site near the museum. I've seen the images from it. It looks fantastic. And not having been there myself, I would still say, having been a reenactor in my own right, this looks like a fantastic time,
It is.
and a great memorial to the men who fought in this area. So if
And
you do,
when you realize that, I know the guys who organize it, like Eddie Montfort, he's the main character in it. It's just a really small group, like 5, 6 guys, who take care of this event, and they do a magnificent job. It's
yeah,
incredible what they created in the last couple of years, and they're really active in it, and they know a lot of people. And well, you saw it. We have enormous amount of vehicles coming over, and well, they do a fantastic job. I
yeah, it
hope we
was
can
very,
keep
very
that.
impressive. Very impressive.
Absolutely. Shall we go back to the story, because we're
Yeah, we have to have
getting.
the 75th needs a counterattack. We have to
Yeah,
have, we have to
we're
put a
getting in
bow
an
on this.
exciting we're getting in an exciting moment, because here they lost 5 tanks, and in the statement of Franz Fraiture, he's saying something like, well, in Grandmenil we took the town, and then we left in the direction of RSA, and the plan was go there, take that town. It's I think like 8 miles. Take that town, and then we will have a small Christmas party, and then move on to in the direction of Hotel. That was the plan. But in his statement, he says, well, on the way, it didn't go so well. So we decided to turn around and go back to Grandmenil. Well, until now, his statement is very accurate. If you compare with the American side, it's very well, very, very good. But at this point, he's lying. What they do is they send out 8 Panther tanks, which is led by a Sherman tank. They use this as a Judas goat, as a distraction. And we'll get back to the Sherman tank, because it's for many years that has been discussed if it was there or not, but I proved that it is there. So they go on the way, and if you can go to slide number 18, we get a better vision. What they don't realize is that the 75th Infantry 289th is pulling up in that area, and they are in a place, at least K Company is in a place called Trou du Loup, the Wolf Gap, building up a defensive position, and they are digging in foxholes, etc. They are preparing for incoming German troops, and they had to put up roadblocks, cutting away trees, laid over the road, etc. But they couldn't do that because the Americans are still retreating. So at one point, when they are preparing to make the roadblocks, there's a truck stopping. And this guy's hanging out of the window, screaming to them that they have to pay attention because there are Germans on the way. And he was the last one that left Grandmenil. So he takes off, and in that area, it's a bend in the road, as you can see on the map. Those guys are getting nervous. They have just arrived from Le Havre, went through Flanders, and arrived in this area. It's cold and miserable. There's a little bit of drizzling and a mist and a little bit of snow. And all of a sudden, coming from the right side, there's fire coming in. And according to a veteran, I have a statement, thanks to Marty Rosenblatt, that's his father, Cyril Rosenblatt. He's out of Trou du Loup on the way to Grandmenil, sitting on the side of the road. And he hears the fire as one of the first, and he sees a Sherman tank bypassing as fast as possible. And in his memoirs, he writes down, those were brave guys. Those guys were on the run for 8 Panther tanks that were chasing this Sherman tank. So he believed that the Sherman tank was occupied by the Americans.
U.S. troops, yeah.
So this Sherman tank dives into through the Lou, and again, like the truck, he stops somewhere in it. The hatch
What's
is
interesting
open.
is he was the U.S. veteran was in position to see the 8 Panthers go as well, because
Yep.
obviously he counted them because he gives you such a precise number in his account of this.
Yeah, and during the years, this is one of the first researches that I ever did, and I'm still on it. I'm still trying to get more details out of it. There's many veterans who talked about 8 Panther tanks, and that Sherman tank that's going into through the Lou. And as soon as it is there, they see that Sherman tank, and they conclude, hey, apparently there was another Sherman tank still in Grandmenil who's on the run now, so let it bypass. And at one point the hatch opens and they see a figure popping out, and he's looking around, and all of a sudden he shouts to the crew inside that tank, weiterfahren, weiterfahren. Well, my American English is pretty good, and that's not sounding like an American language to me. So that's where they found out, oh my God, that was a German sitting in that tank. Well, the Sherman leaves the scene, and from there it vanished out of the story for a long time. Well, as soon as the Sherman gets out of the way, the 8 Panther tanks are rushing in. And the first Panther tank we estimated was around the bend, and that's where he is opening fire at everybody that gets in the way. So with machine gun fires and the tank fire coming in. Right behind him, everybody opens fire on the 75th Infantry Division guy. And according to veterans later that I've been talking to, families, one of the statements that I have that's really important for the research is the statement of David Fennessy. He's in the inner ring, as we call it, standing behind the guy who turned out to be Corporal Richard Wiegand. And David Fennessy, in his statement, he said, well, Richard is standing up and he's aiming his bazooka at the first Panther tank on the backside. And I was looking into the tube. And you can
don't want to be
imagine
there if he fires.
Exactly. So David is standing next to one of his mates, and he grabs him by the arm and drags him behind, and they drop into a foxhole. Richard makes his fire. He fires at the Panther tank in the backside, causing an explosion, and he knocks out that Panther tank standing in the middle of the road. Because of the explosion, Richard Wiegand got killed. We have his document, we have his IDPF, the personal file, where you can see the type of woundings. And we figured out that because of the blast, his arm and legs, he got disfigured. David, he was okay, he survived. And now we have one Panther tank sitting in the middle of the road, blocking the exit for all the other tanks. Franz Fraiture later stated it didn't went so well, so we turned around. But you are looking at the point where the second SS Reich was blocked by just one bazooka shot from a guy who got instantly killed, named Richard Wiegand. And when you look at the Battle of the Bulge overall, this is a huge impact on the whole Battle of the Bulge. If we look back, the northern part, Kampfgruppe Piper, is already knocked out, and then in the middle sector we have the second SS Reich, a highly important division for the German attack, got blocked by one bazooka shot in the corner of a road.
And that in itself is pretty much the story of the Bulge for the Americans. Once the attacks kick off, it's little small bands that end up doing small bands of soldiers that end up doing the worst damage to the German timeline. And the ripple effect that occurs on all these little attacks. And this is a message that I foot stomp across the breadth and width of my tours across the Bulge, is that every one of these is like another bucket of sand in the gears of the German timeline. And in this case, again, it shows what this small group of men do. This one man, what he does, he blunts the entire attack of a reinforced Panther company.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's that in a nutshell describes the the follow-on success of the Bulge. Like it's yes, the American Army is completely caught off guard. Um,
Yeah.
and in many cases, a lot of these units, we don't have these stories, but in this case, your research has uncovered this story and has allowed us to bring it to to our listeners and viewers. Um, and that's what I love about this particular doing this pod, is because I am not a fan of the big sweeping arrows on the map that show this army does that and that general did that. I want to hear about the men who are on the line who did the fighting, and that's the real value of the way you're telling the story, is not only just from the American side, telling from the German side as well, because
Oh yeah.
there's two sides to this, and you can't. There's actually three if you count the civilians and their accounts of it.
Yeah.
And it all has to be melded together to get an accurate picture. But its most intimate form is at the small unit level.
Yeah. And
And that,
if you look
and
at this story, what they say a lot of times about Richard Wigan, by the way, he's in slide number 19, that he made a lucky shot. But and I don't want to be the smart guy, but when you look in the position where he was standing with his gear, he was a corporal, so apparently he had some knowledge. He makes the decision right on time to stand up, get that explosive in the tube, and fire on the backside of the Panther tank. There were multiple guys firing a bazooka at that time at the first Panther tank, but they forgot to ignite that. You have to turn something on the backside of a rocket so it explodes.
yes, there are two arming wires, and then there's an arming pin. There's the two arming wires get connected to the rocket launcher itself, which allows the battery current to go to ignite the motor, and then there's an arming pin in the nose cone of the bazooka round as well. And
That's
you have to take in order for the rocket to be active so it'll explode, you have to take the
yeah.
arming pin
Well, that
out.
was a detail I didn't know. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. What's interesting about Richard's picture is wearing an MP brassard.
Yeah.
So he's not an infantryman by trade. He's an MP.
Yeah, so this is before he got to Europe, and when you also look, apparently he was an MP at an Air Force base.
I was going to say, as an Army Air Corps patch on his shoulder as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
interesting that he ends up becoming a hero in an infantry role, which it might not be what he was actually trained to do.
Yeah, and all the veterans agree, by the way, that he saved a lot of lives. If
Oh, no doubt.
the Germans made a mistake here, they left Grandmenil without infantry, so we only have tanks crawling around in that area. But if it wasn't for him, they would open fire on everybody, and they would go to the next village of Bristol, and then maybe to Arizay. And I strongly believe if it wasn't for Richard Wigan, they would have reached that town of Bristol, but they would have run into the 3rd Armored Division. They were assembling all their troops over there. It's the 36th Armored Infantry Regiment with all the tanks. So it would have ended for the Second SS Reich in that town. That's what I strongly believe. But the amount of casualties would have been much bigger. And Richard, he got a Distinguished Service Cross. And I want to make a point here. I agree with the Distinguished Service Cross, but in fact, I think he should have had a Medal of Honor for the thing he did here. And I know there were officers around him, so it's a little bit strange he didn't get that.
Yeah, that is. But still, the Distinguished Service Cross is the second highest decoration for valor in that the United States has. So it's not like he was he ended up getting a Bronze Star. The DSC is a fine award for and without deep diving into the actions itself, it's tough to say whether or not it would have warranted the Medal of Honor. But it's a shame it had to be posthumous in this regard.
Yeah. And it's the only shot he made. The only shot that he ever made.
But this, like you said, this eventually grinds the advance to a halt. this action.
Yeah. Because from here, they tried it a couple of times in January, still in January, with a lot of infantry coming from the area of Odenje, go into the woods, but the hills on that side are so steep and so high that on that side we will find the 75th Infantry Division strongly dug in. And when the attack went too strong from German side, they just run uphill, dug in again, and they were just waiting for the Germans to pull up. And in December, on the 27th, that is, they made an infantry attack on the village of Satso, that's close to Bristol, with an enormous amount of infantry. We also found elements from the Hitlerjugend, by the way, a lot of paratroopers, and the Americans barely could held off the attacks. It's an enormous, heavy attack that they made, and thanks to the guys from a field artillery battalion, the 509 and the 3rd Armored Division and the 75th Infantry Division, they could withstand the attacks. And that was the last major attack in that area. So on the 27th of December, the fighting was dying out, and they could concentrate on the other side, retaking Grandmenil, retaking Manhay, etc.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that this becomes the counterattack phase, where the reduction of the Bulge itself, and essentially the pushing the German army back to the pre-attack positions.
Yeah.
Which by then they've realized, hey, we're not going to make our objectives. We need to start consolidating our forces for the defense of the Reich, and start pulling them back. But Bob, I got to say, this is a fantastic presentation. It's a real tour de force of this whole battle. And again, like we had to start early with Baraque de Fraiture and go through all that, because that's the scene setter. But you did such a deft job. Again, I want everybody, if you're interested in this battle, you definitely need to hop on Bob's website and take a look at it. He goes through it day by day, pretty much. From start to finish, all the things that we discussed in detail, with a lot more witness statements and a lot more of that tactical level detail about the men who were part of the fighting and the civilians who witnessed it. There's quite a bit of imagery on there as well, both maps that Bob has created and the pictures of the folks that were involved in the fighting. So what have you got coming up? I know, again, Bob runs his own tour company, and if you're interested in going and touring, taking a Battle of the Bulge tour, I highly recommend Bob. He's great. He's very detailed oriented, and he knows the ground very well. But what have you got coming up this year in terms of tours? Do you have anything set already, or are you doing it by, as people contact you?
By request, yes, that's the first part. So it's going to be an enormous busy year for us. I'm very lucky that my wife took over the administration for me, all the emailing, telephones, etc., because it's a daytime. We have several requests coming in per day. So I mostly do private tours. So if we have a couple, there will be a couple, and smaller groups. And I'm getting this year a little bit more to bigger groups. And it's not my favorite, because then you will have a coach bus with great people. I'm pretty sure it will be great people, but I cannot do my favorite things, stopping everywhere, zooming in, getting all the details out. And it's impossible to drive and to stop at every stop that I want people to stop and get out of the bus again and sniff up the environment, etc. So
yeah. I'm of the same mind. I like doing small group tours.
Yeah.
Would I like to do big group tours? Sure, I've done them before, but I find it's a little unwieldy at times. It's much easier to have like a small group, like you said. We'll use a small passenger van, which allows us to get into those areas. And coaches are just so terribly unmaneuverable and too big for a lot of
I'm
these
working
spots.
with a small tablet, like a computer. You can also show the maps, and you can zoom in, but you also can show videos. That's but if you have a coach bus, that tablet is way too small.
Yep.
So
yeah, I do the same thing.
and,
I do the same thing. It makes it easier instead of having to travel with all these laminated placards, everything on the tab and a tablet. It's sometimes you have to fight the environment a little bit, but I like you said, just so much more that you can make you can have on there. You can have the videos from the official Signal Corps video you can have on there.
Yeah.
You can have all the pictures, all the maps. You can zoom in on stuff, and
Yeah.
you can pass it around. That's
Yeah,
the best part about it.
exactly.
If you want to,
Exactly.
if you got a small group, you can just hand it off to them. But yeah, you fantastic work. So if you have a private tour in mind that you'd like to take and you're looking for a guide, Bob is available. Well, again, we'll have his
More than welcome.
contact. Yeah, we'll have his contact information and his website listed in the show description. I think we're ready to close her up for episode 28.
Yeah, for the
I want-
project, because you asked for project, a quick one.
Oh, yeah.
I hope to prove 100% that the Sherman tank was there. I already have a piece of it, but it's
Okay.
it's not 100% visible that it's from a Sherman tank. But I will prove that the coming months. And further on, I have some crash sites on the road that I'm visiting and trying to find out more information. I was looking for a Lancaster crash site before you called in. I find some proof of it that actually a Lancaster crashed there. So,
Yeah.
so that's the thing we're gonna do.
If you're listening or watching and you think you might have some information to help Bob fulfill his quest, please reach out to him. I'm sure historians rely on so many different outlets to help them stitch the stories together, and any help
Absolutely.
you could provide, if you know something or you have your hands on an after action report or a veteran's account that talks about it, please touch base with Bob. I know if I was in his shoes, I would definitely appreciate it. But that's it for this episode of the We're Not Lost Private podcast. Again, we're on Patreon. If you want to become a member, it's $3 a month to become a supporter. You get all the episodes plus all the behind the scenes stuff, videos from the field, operational reports, photographs, everything that folks that aren't subscribers will get. We also can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Spotify, just about any place you catch your pods. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I appreciate you. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Joe. Was a great episode. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.